Emily Carter stared at the monitor until the blue light burned her eyes. A notification pinged. The sound was thin, digital, and final. She leaned in, her cursor hovering over the small window. Her first file had sold. The profit was $17. She did not see a trivial amount. She saw a crack in the wall. She had built the file once, months ago, and forgotten it in the deep archives of her drive. Now, it had moved on its own. She pushed her chair back, the wheels scraping against the hardwood floor. Outside, the city was dark, but the room felt suddenly bright. She had traded no extra hours for this payment. No commute, no time clock, no manager, just the quiet hum of the processor and the realization that the system had functioned without her presence. She touched the corner of the screen, tracing the numbers. It was a small, silent victory, but it was absolute. This was not just a transaction. It was the seed of a future where time was not the price of survival. She stood up, walked to the window, and watched the traffic below. The logic of her life had just shifted. The next morning, the office felt like a cage. Emily sat at her desk, watching the clock move with agonizing precision. Every dollar she earned required exactly 1 hour of her life. She looked at her spreadsheet, tracking the monotonous rhythm of her tasks. It was a closed loop. She arrived, she performed. She exchanged a fixed slice of her existence for a fixed amount of currency. If she stopped, the money stopped. There was no leverage. She stared at the wall, thinking of the $17 from the night before. That money had arrived while she slept. It was independent of her pulse. She began to read, consuming books on the mechanics of wealth until the pages blurred. The core truth emerged from the text. Time is a finite resource, and trading it directly for labor is a dead end. She realized she had been selling her life in segments. To escape, she had to build a system that operated beyond her physical presence. Scalability was not just a business term, it was her only path to autonomy. She closed her work email, opened a blank project file, and began to map out a structure that would eventually replace the hourly grind. Emily began the work in the hours between midnight and dawn. She crafted planners, complex business toolkits, and guides meant to streamline chaos into order. She uploaded them to the web, watching the progress bars crawl across her screen. Then, she waited. A day passed, then a week. The dashboard remained stagnant. Her analytics page showed nothing but flat, horizontal lines. For the first year, her products existed in a vacuum. No clicks, no downloads, no revenue. The silence from the internet was total. She spent her nights refining layouts, choosing fonts, and organizing data, only to wake up to the same $0 balance. Her friends noticed the exhaustion in her eyes and the glow of her monitor at 3 in the morning. "Why are you still building these empty files?" they asked over coffee. "Nobody is buying them. You are wasting your life on ghost projects." The words stung because they were technically correct. She felt the weight of their doubt pressing down on her resolve. She sat in the quiet of her apartment, staring at the screen that refused to move, feeling the isolation of a path that no one else could see. She was building in the dark, and for 365 days, the dark did not break. The doubt of others was merely noise. The real problem was her own lack of data. Emily stopped guessing what the market wanted and started looking at the cold, hard numbers of her failures. She pulled up the logs. Every click that did not convert was now a clue. Every view that did not lead to a purchase was a diagnostic point. She stopped viewing her empty dashboard as a reflection of her worth and started seeing it as a mechanical error to be corrected. She mapped out the user journey, identifying exactly where interest evaporated. She checked her landing page load times, the clarity of her headlines, and the flow of her checkout process. She was an engineer of systems, and she treated her digital store as a flawed machine needing calibration. When a friend asked if she had finally given up, she did not bother to defend her dream. She simply adjusted a line of copy, tweaked a pricing tier, and refreshed the page. She was no longer building in the dark. She was auditing her own progress. Each rejection became a piece of feedback, stripping away the guesswork. She kept her eyes on the metrics, refining the system with surgical precision, waiting for the moment the friction would disappear. The metrics were only half the story. Emily needed to know what the numbers could not tell her. She reached out to the handful of people who had visited her store, sending personal messages to anyone who had hovered near the checkout. She stripped away the automated marketing language and asked simple, direct questions. What problem were you trying to solve, and why did you walk away? The replies came in fragments, often blunt or incomplete. She saved every response in a spreadsheet, color-coding the frustrations and the missed expectations. She realized her designs were technically sound but emotionally hollow. She was selling tools, but her buyers needed outcomes. She began to dismantle her toolkits, reordering the information to focus on immediate relief for the user. She spent nights rewriting landing pages, replacing generic descriptions with specific, problem-solving benefits. She tested new layouts, watched the bounce rates, and tweaked the design elements again. The pace of her work intensified. She stopped viewing her store as a repository of files and started seeing it as a conversation. Every change was a hypothesis. Every refresh was a test. The friction began to drop. The machine was finally humming with intent, and the silence that had defined her first year was beginning to crack. The first sign was a flicker in the dashboard. A productivity template, one she had nearly deleted weeks ago, began to move. It climbed from 0 views to 5, then 50, then 100. Emily watched the graph spike. It was not a steady crawl. It was a vertical ascent. Then, the inbox chime rang. It was not a generic receipt. A user had written a long, detailed account of their day. They explained how her template had organized their chaotic inventory system, effectively saving their entire business from collapse. Emily read the message 3 times. She looked at the file, then back at the screen. It was just a document, yet it had functioned as a lifeline. The barrier between her work and the world had vanished. She realized then that she had been trapped in a mindset of selling digital units. That was the mistake. She was not in the business of selling files. She was in the business of delivering solutions. The weight of that realization hit her with absolute clarity. She stood up, paced the room, and looked at her other products with new eyes. Every document was a tool for someone else's survival. The shift was absolute. She was no longer a creator of digital goods. She was an architect of outcomes. The pivot ignited a chain reaction. Emily stopped refining single files and started building entire ecosystems. She took her core methodology and branched it out, expanding her catalog from 10 products to 50 in a single month. She mapped out every pain point in a professional workflow, creating a toolkit for every possible bottleneck. The dashboard became a map of the world. She watched the geographic data points populate in real time. A customer in Tokyo purchased a comprehensive project guide while she was fast asleep in her apartment in New York. She woke up to a notification that the sale had finalized hours ago. There were no shipping costs, no inventory to manage, and no human intervention required. The store was a living, breathing entity that never shuttered its doors. She refreshed the page and saw 3 more sales from London and a bulk purchase from a firm in Berlin. The scale was no longer a theory. It was a constant ticking rhythm of incoming revenue. She realized the digital storefront was operating at a pace she could never sustain manually. Her work was traveling across borders while she rested, effectively decoupling her productivity from the limits of her own physical time. The revenue stream was no longer just a paycheck, it was a surplus. Emily looked at the growing balance and traced the path of the money. She could have upgraded her living space or bought luxury goods, but she saw those as leaks in the system. Instead, she opened a brokerage account. She treated her digital profits like a business that needed to be scaled further. Every dollar that landed in her account was immediately redirected. She bought index funds. She targeted dividend-paying stocks. She turned the liquid cash into anchors of wealth. She watched the dividends accumulate. It was a secondary cycle of growth, independent of her own labor. When she slept, the stocks moved, the market shifted, and the interest compounded. She had built a bridge between her active work and a future that did not require her presence. The digital store was the engine, but the portfolio was the foundation. She stopped looking at the total as money to be spent and started viewing it as a fleet of assets working for her. She was no longer just a creator. She was an investor. The cycle was complete. Her work was finally paying her back in ways that would last long after the screen went dark. The interface refreshed, pulling data from the last quarter. Emily watched the numbers climb. The total hit 900,000, then stalled for a week before a surge in corporate licensing pushed it higher. She sat in her chair, cursor hovering over the refresh button. She did not need to shout. She did not need to celebrate. She simply watched the figure cross the 7-digit threshold. $1 million. She looked back at her ledger. There were no viral marketing explosions, no venture capital injections, and no debt-laden loans to fuel the growth. Every dollar had been earned through the cold, steady application of utility. She had spent years identifying bottlenecks for others, then building the digital tools to clear them. She had treated each user complaint as a design requirement and every transaction as a validation of her methodology. She pulled up the initial project files she had created years ago. They looked rudimentary now, but the core architecture remained identical. She had simply scaled the volume of people those files served. She leaned back, closed the tab, and looked at the clock. The work was finished for the day, but the store remained open, still processing payments, still solving problems, and still adding to the total while she sat in the silence of her office. Emily pulled an old hard drive from her desk drawer. She plugged it in and navigated to a folder dated years ago. There it was, the original file, the one that sold for $17. She opened it, scanning the simple layout and the basic text. It felt small, yet it held the weight of everything that followed. That single sale had not been about the money. It was the proof of concept. It was the moment she realized she could build something once and let it work for her forever. She looked away from the screen and back at the $1,000,000 ledger. The journey from that first $17 to this current balance was not a leap. It was a series of small, calculated refinements. She realized then that the magic was never in the product catalog or the marketing strategy. It was in the shift of perspective. She had stopped trading her hours for a wage and started building tools that served others in her absence. Wealth was not about the accumulation of cash, but the creation of assets that persisted. She ejected the drive, placed it back in the drawer, and closed the desk. The system was running. The assets were working. She had finally learned the secret. Money is the result of value delivered at scale, and true freedom is the ownership of the machine that provides it.